Welcome back to BetterHelp's In-Session series. I'm Hesu Jo and a licensed therapist, part of clinical operations team here at BetterHelp. I'm super excited to be joined by Shani Tran, who's been on this show before. And Shani Tran is a licensed therapist who's been featured in Teen Vogue, Forbes, CBS Mornings, and the New York Times. She's the author of Dope Therapy, a book about owning your mental health journey. And you can also find her on TikTok and Instagram making comedy sketches and telling personal stories to encourage people to laugh through the adversity, which I love. Shani, thank you so much for being part of our In-Session series. Like I said, super excited to have you back on here. To get us started, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what it's like being such a well-known therapist creator on TikTok and Instagram?
Let's see. I had this recent recollection. I used to identify as an introvert, and I think that now that I've been spending a lot more time with introverts, I'm not an introvert. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and revert back to saying I'm an extrovert. I literally am like, yep, that's me. When I see the difference in energy, I'm like, yep, okay. I'm sorry to all my friends that I have told you I'm an introvert, and then you get around me, you're like, girl, no. So that's something recent that I have just sort of like switched around with myself. See, I'm also a therapist, but I like to say it's a part of what I do and not who I am. I'm also a mom, a wife, a friend, a daughter. Some of the things that I love doing is I love to run. It's just like my way of having catharsis, I guess you could say. If I'm feeling like angry or anxious, I'm just like, how can we convert this energy? And so I usually like to go for a run. And I think one of the most important things about me that I like people to know is I am a Taurus. I love food. I love food. I have driven 2 hours one way to get pizza.
It's
Yes.
been some good pizza.
It was worth it. It was worth it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. Yeah, the introversion extroversion thing is very interesting. I have observed people share that there's been shifts in their life over that too, or even thinking like, I don't think I really was interpreting what those things meant. So I think a lot of people will think that a lot of therapists are introverted, which is really interesting. And a lot of therapists hear that and then think, I am introverted. And I can kind of relate to that too, right? It's like the different kind of energy, where we get it from, who we get it from, how we get it. Did we talk about how it feels for you being such a well-known
Oh,
content creator?
oh
Because I
yeah.
am
No, I
curious
did
about
not.
that.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's very interesting. I feel as if it's not something that happened like overnight. Like I wasn't in a movie and it was like, boom, here you are. Here's this lifestyle. It's definitely been like a growth process. And so in the process, I've just kind of been flowing with it. And I would say where it is at right now, I love the platform that I have and I love the community because as someone I moved to Arizona during the pandemic. So I like to say that I don't really have any like go-to supportive friendships here. I do have people that I've known and I hang out with. But with that being said, I then depend on sort of like my friends that I've met on the internet that I feel closer to, and also my community. They're also a part of, I would say, my social interaction as well. So it's really great for me to hear stories from them or having validation too. Like, yes, I love this video. When sometimes I'm just like, I just picked up a camera and maybe a story from my past came into my thought and I was like, oh, let me do a get ready with me and tell this story. And then people were like, I love this story, I feel so seen. I'm like, you too. So I would say I'm just so grateful for the platform that I have, and I'm so grateful for my community and the things that I'm able to do in this life because of my platform.
That's wonderful. It's very interesting because for such a long time, I think the lives of therapists was probably pretty mysterious. Privacy and
Mm,
confidentiality. These things are such huge tenets in our field. So I think it makes a lot of sense for many therapists to have turned inward in their lives too and keep it very behind closed doors. So this new age of therapists being content creators has been so fascinating for me because it really humanizes the therapist. You mentioned therapy is something that you do, it's not who you are.
mhm.
And I think that's really, really wonderful and impactful reminder for the people out there that your therapist or the therapists that you're seeing on screen are just people. And with
Yeah.
these kinds of platforms, it allows people to see that and to really absorb that. which I think is beautiful, because ultimately when somebody does decide to go to therapy, they're just entering another relationship with another person that's there to accompany them on something.
And I love the way that you said that they're entering a relationship with someone. And even as a therapist, when I was in grad school, it was sort of like drilled in us, don't self disclose. It has to be for the benefit of the client. Like everything has to be for the benefit of the client. And I think that opening sort of this door of therapists being humans and we go through things, I believe that it showcases a different side of therapy where clients, let's say if someone is going to come see me as a clinician and they come across my page and they're like, oh my God, I relate to her. Like there's some topics. So she truly might understand me in this position that I'm in, and I want to see her or him or them. And I think that that's important because you can't get that from reading a profile.
Can't get that from a profile. He reminded me of like some research I've read around the very high rates of clients that lie to their therapists about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think some of it might come from clients wanting to perform. It's like hardwired in us to try to make a good impression on people. We want other people to like us and not be disappointed in us. And maybe it could have come from this idea that this therapist knows everything. This therapist has their stuff all together. They have all the tools and the skills to live a happy, balanced, healthy life. They probably have perfect relationships. They never get into arguments with anybody. So I don't want them to actually judge me or know all the terrible things about me. So I just will tell them that everything is going fine right now.
Yeah.
But it sounds like through your platform, you've been able to create a very safe space for people to engage with your thought, your insight. But beyond the platforms and the works that you're doing on social media, what does creating a safe space look like for you?
Well, actually, let me ask the question. What does it look like to create a safe space for me, or what does it look like to create a safe space for a community? Because I think they are different, but they are intertwined.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on both of those
Okay.
questions.
So I think one of the things, I'll start with myself, because when I'm on social media and I'm creating content or I tell a story about my life, or even sometimes I share my opinion, people see me as a therapist and sometimes they want to correct me. And so one of the things that I like to tell my community is, in creating a safe space for you, that does not mean that it becomes unsafe for me. So, for instance, if I post anything about being bisexual and then someone comes into my comments and they're saying something about my lifestyle, and I'm like, guess what? This video is for me, not for you. I'm hoping that you relate to it, but you don't get to come into this space and make it unsafe for me as well as my community. So that's like one of the things that I do is I like navigate comments. Sometimes I'll delete them, sometimes I'll just block the person. It I'm not going to lie, it depends on my mood for the day. Sometimes I'll respond to the comment. I'm human. It just depends on where I am. And in doing that, I have to remember that people look up to me, but sometimes I like to knock my own self off the pedestal that people put me on, because I want them to see that I have flaws, that I mess up, that I'm basically human and I too go through things, and it's okay to be inspired and encouraged by me, but also know that like I make mistakes just like you. I've hurt people, I've said mean things. And it's about like taking accountability or processing what comes from that. So that's one of the things that I navigate and making it a safe space for me. Now when it comes to making a safe space for people, it depends on who you are when you come to my platform. And I say that because sometimes there's currently a series that I do where, like, instead of saying Karen, I say Karen. And sometimes white people don't like that. And they're like, why would you do that? And I'm like, oh, because people mispronounce my name wrong all the time. I'm a Black woman and my name is Shani. And I'm just sort of like showing you in a humorous way what that feels like. So it's safe for you to be here, but know that you might also learn a lesson through my sketches and my comedy. And it's not meant to hurt you. It's meant for you to have an inside look into the experiences of other people that you may not be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be, I always like to talk about that, because I think sometimes when people hear safe space, they think neutral. And I'm just letting people know, when you come to my page, it's not neutral in that way. It's just safe in a space of like, you can laugh, but it's also meant to encourage you. But know that I'm not going to intentionally like be mean or hurt you.
I'm hearing then safe space that is being intentionally created by you is largely about authenticity, about creating a space that you can show up as yourself. And then when it comes to creating the safe space for the people that come to view, it's still about making sure that you can show up as yourself and
Yeah.
hoping for anybody that's choosing to be part of the audience, they can learn to accept that, right? Is accept the space in which
Yes.
somebody else can show up as themselves and not take it as an attack on them, that you're just being yourself. And you mentioned this other thing, right? Being a Black woman, having sketches
Yeah.
around this, hopefully widening perspective for people. So, kind of a broad question on that topic is just wanting to hear more about your experience in general, being a therapist of color, being a Black therapist.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When you ask that question, I go back to, I think about, so my private practice is actually located in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. So that's maybe 15 minutes from Minneapolis, I would say. So that's where George Floyd was murdered.
Mhm.
So being a Black therapist, there, I did have clients that were white at the time that lived in Minnesota. And I do remember when some of them would want to process it, before we would process it, I would have to say, I just want to remind you that I am Black. And should we be processing something that could potentially harm me, I'm just letting you know that we would not be able to do that.
Mhm.
So I think that that's very important to mention, because I think some people assume that you can sort of just come, you can come to therapy and you can say whatever you want to say. And to a certain extent, that is true, but also recognizing that your therapist is a human too. And in helping you, that does not mean that we put our own mental health or safety at risk. So that's just like one example. Another example is during the elections of 2020. I always get my years confused.
Yeah, 2020.
2020. Yes, moving to Arizona, which was a state that flipped from red to blue, that was processing that with like some of my clients as well, of what they were like going through, but then being like, oh, this isn't my therapy session, and feeling so like I was taking on a lot because I hadn't even processed it for myself yet. And so holding space for like 6, 7 hours a day for clients to process that, and you yourself having to put yourself on hold, I would say for the day, that can be challenging as well. So there were definitely days where I was just like, it's exhausting to be Black today. I mean, it's always exhausting to be Black, but I feel like on some days during the election year, I was just like, I just need to like close my eyes, turn off my phone, don't watch TV, don't do anything, and just like be.
And just be. While you're speaking, the word that was coming up for me is privilege, and not because it's like
Mm.
something that everybody's talking about all the time right now,
Yeah.
but the idea of entering the therapy session and kind of always having it in the back of your mind that you're Black,
Yeah.
and I can kind of relate. It is often in the back of my mind that I'm not white,
Yeah.
um, that I have this layer of something about me that some people can make assumptions based on how I look. They can make, some kind of preconceived judgment that I will be a certain way because of their ideas of what people that look like me might be or do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the reason I was thinking of privilege is because there are many therapists that don't think about that don't have to think about that
Yeah.
presentation of themselves when they show up. And that's the privilege, right? So I'm really grateful that you shared about that personal experience of yours, because I can understand it being exhausting at certain times, depending on what your clients want to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm also very, impressed and thankful that you named that ahead of time with certain clients, that like, this is part of who I am. And there are considerations when it comes to that, because I think you and I have probably seen situations in which clients kind of forget that there's all
Yeah.
these things about the therapist that might impact the way that they can show up. You mentioned that you have some comedy sketches that are very much tied to this identity piece and related to mental health. So seems like you draw inspiration from your identity and your profession for your content, but what other things inspire you to create the type of content that you do?
Just life, like what's happening in my everyday life. So sometimes I will tell stories, and it could be about how I remember there was one time when I was walking on the sidewalk, and it was like someone expected me to move to like let them through. And I was like, oh, no, no. And so like I literally will then just come back and tell the story from like different angles with like a sense of humor to it. And sometimes I literally will be eating dinner and I'm like, oh my gosh, the way you're eating this pizza right now, this is a great comedy sketch. So it literally like I feel like one of my friends, she says to me sometimes, she goes, Shani, not everything is content. And I'm like, yes, it is. Literally everything is content. It's just if you want to create it or not. That's seriously how I look at it. I would like to say that I draw inspiration from other people. So let's say if I come across a TikTok and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. Knowing that I'm not the original creator of that idea, instead, I try to look to, okay, how do I draw inspiration from it instead of being like, that's a good idea. How do I just recreate it in my own way? I try to be cognizant of that because in the TikTok or Instagram, whatever social media space there is, I want to be respectful of other creators, and I want to also make sure that I produce original content. So if there's ever a time where I'm not able to come up with ideas for new content, that honestly to me is an indicator that I need to take a break, because
Mhm.
I feel like I can literally get content from anything in my life. So if I'm like, oh, I just don't know what I'm going to create this week, it's like, okay, it's time for a break. You can go ahead and do some reposts. You have tons of content. Go through your pictures, maybe post a static post instead of reel. So I try to be cognizant of those things.
Oh, okay. So you're kind of describing like a self-awareness piece of tuning in, especially in times maybe you're not finding influence or inspiration, um, which sounds kind of related to maybe being unmotivated or hitting some kind of roadblock.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to people, or do you have any tips or advice for people that are also experiencing some kind of blockage when it comes to their
Yeah.
creativity?
Yeah. So I don't know if this will work for everyone, but for me, I usually like to rest and let my almost like, because you can burn yourself out as a creative, and just not, it doesn't even have to be creating content. You can be a painter, you can be a poet, a writer, a singer. And so if I can't come up with something, I'm like, that means I need to rest. That's how I view it for myself. Now, if you are someone that's like, well, maybe that's not really what works for me, I would say research. So for instance, if there are times where I'm like, I want to make a video on, let's say, depression. I'm like, I just don't know. I've done depression quite a few times. Like, what does this mean? Nothing is coming. Well, then I might actually go and do some research on depression, because that's the beauty of research. There's always new things coming about. And I'm also not the smartest person in the world. I don't think any of us are. I always like to look at myself as a learner. And so what I do is then I will go and like Google depression. I feel like maybe in mental health, it's a little bit different because I have to make sure that it comes from a reputable source. And in doing that, then oftentimes I'll be like, oh, I've never heard of that. And so let me do a little bit more research on this aspect. And then that will get the ideas flowing. And I don't ever try to force my ideas out. I pause there because I'm like, I do have deadlines sometimes. So sometimes I do have to make sure that it comes out. But for the most part, I never just like sit down with like a pen and pencil and be like, okay, what do you want to do for depression? What do you want to do for depression? I sort
Mhm.
of like let it marinate. Okay, did this research, go about my day, and more than likely within a couple of days, something will come to me. I feel like it mainly comes to me when I'm eating, when I'm in the shower. And this sounds really weird, but right before I fall asleep, because
Mhm.
I keep a notebook by my bedside because I don't ever get sleep if you have an idea. You're like, remember this idea in the morning, remember this idea in the morning. Never works for me. And
Oh,
I've
girl.
been mad at myself when I wake up and I'm like, what was that amazing idea? And so I keep a notepad by my bedside. And if I ever have, I'm just like, okay, jot it down, finish it off in the morning.
That's great advice. I agreed with you so hard with that example that came to me right now. Is like, don't forget to take the whatever to the
Yep.
office. Don't forget to take the office. I'll remember.
Yep.
And don't forget. And then, you head out and you're like, oh, I forgot that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Yes.
interesting. You shared it. Sometimes the inspiration will just hit you in the shower, about to fall asleep. Those are quiet times. Nobody bugging you during those
Mm-hmm.
times generally. So it makes sense for your mind to have the capacity to do that. I do want to add for people, creativity takes energy, and the
Yes.
energy that we have for anything in any given day is finite. So if your energy is depleted, your advice for resting makes a lot of sense to me. You need
Mm-hmm.
to recharge and restore that level of energy within you, in order to get back to the creativity. I think some of us have also heard the quote that boredom spawns creativity. And,
Mm-hmm.
so many of us often don't allow ourselves to get bored anymore. There's so many different ways that we can get stimulated by all kinds of stuff. People
Yeah.
can't stand being bored. But I would encourage people to get into the practice of just being still, inviting some stillness into your life, similar to getting in the shower where nobody's bugging you. This is when sometimes our brain juices can get flowing again. Now, specifically talking in this topic for therapist creators, do you have any tips or advice you'd like to share for any other therapist creators that might be just starting out or interested in doing something like you're doing?
Yeah, I would just say be yourself. That's the most important thing. I feel like when, granted, I also want to preface this by saying I've been out of grad school over a decade. Oh my goodness. But I feel like when I was in grad school, there was just this like drill of professionalism, how to sit with the client, how to be in the room with the client, like all these just sort of like societal norms about and westernized ways of being a therapist. When I think the most important thing is people oftentimes when they come to therapy or even when they're looking at a therapist, they want to see that we are people too. Um, and so find your way of being yourself and delivering mental health content. So it might not be comedy sketches. Maybe you're really great at explaining personality disorders and you know how to explain it in a way that's digestible. And so you just want to have like sit down, talking type, talk to the camera type content. Do that. Be yourself. If that's a part of how you view mental health, then do that. Also, if you're the person that's like, actually, no, I want to do a little cosplay while I also talk about how you sit in a therapist's office, like, do that. I think the most important thing is be yourself and just start. Because I do get sometimes comments where therapists are like, have you ever had where like a client finds you on social media and I only know they find me if they tell me in a session
Mm-hmm.
because people have different, what do you call that? Like handles. And
Mm-hmm.
so if they do tell me in a session, oh, hey, Shani, I came across your TikTok, I'm like, oh, great. And then I just like to remind them, don't be commenting, hey, this is my therapist. For your protection, don't be commenting that. But I would just say pick up the camera, start, and go from there. I started in social creation doing actual like makeup like reviews like where you buy all like the
Oh, like a
lipsticks and then
haul and a
yeah like a haul and I was like oh that's
box opening.
expensive especially when I'm not using all the colors that's expensive and so but how that transferred into mental health and TikTok creation is I'm a dancer. I was on the dance team in college. I was on the dance team in high school. I still love to dance. And so when I started creating TikToks, I was just actually dancing. And then I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm going to add some captions about how to find a therapist. And usually when I do a dance videos, those to this day are still some of my more popular videos, and I'm just being myself. So, maybe you're someone that there's a creator that I follow on Instagram, and I forget her handle, but she bakes. And then while she's baking, she gives you like this really raw advice on life. And like half the time, I'm like, I don't know if I'm paying attention to the life advice or the tiramisu she's teaching us how to cook. So, find what you want to do and be okay switching it up, navigating, because you might do something one day and you're like, yeah, that I just didn't really feel like that was authentic to me. That's okay. Don't let your community decide who you are in the social media space. I think that's the biggest advice or the best advice that I would give is, even though people are like, oh, I like this content. Oh, wow, you're posting a get ready with me. When I actually like it when you just talk to the camera. Don't let people determine how you show up in the social media space. You show up in the social media space and you will attract the community that it is that you want.
Love that. And you said authentic, because that's what I was thinking again too, is like it sounds like it's about authenticity, especially for therapists, content creators. This idea that people go to therapy to find authenticity in their own lives. I think a lot of people, especially viewers, are going to expect for somebody making this kind of content to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people can detect very quickly when someone's far from that in their content. Some other questions are still coming up for me, like this idea that you should show up, or you would benefit from showing up as yourself, not letting your community dictate what kind of content you're putting out there. How do you combat this idea of, I got to do what my community wants to get more views? Like, how do you get away from
Mm.
that as a content creator?
You know, it's very one of the things that I have learned in the content creation space is that, so I had a business coach once, and we were talking about I guess you could say, my plan for content creation. And she said something that like always stuck with me. And at the time I think it was like 25K on Instagram. And it hasn't grown. I mean, it's grown, but right now it's sitting at like 41K. So when I had 25K, and I was like, yeah, I just got to like pump out all this content. I want to post like 5 days a week. And she was like, you don't need the clout though. And I was like, what do you mean? That's how you get brand deals. You do need the clout. They want to see the numbers. And they were like, and she was like, no, you don't, like, just be yourself, build it, and they will come. And sometimes I have other therapist friends that have like I have therapist friends that have like 200K on Instagram, 150K on Instagram, and they sometimes are asking me, Shani, how are you getting these brand deals? And I'm like, I don't know, you got the numbers. And so I feel like I am like this living proof that it's not always about the numbers. And I know that some people may say, but Shani, you have 500K on TikTok. Even though I have 500K on TikTok, sometimes I tell brands, let me actually post it on Instagram where I have less followers, because that's where I have more engagement. That's where we're going to get more comments, me engaging in the comments. Whereas on TikTok, it can hit anyone. And I know as a brand that may be what they want, but depending on the type of content that you're having me create, I don't mind. I know it's going to be a cheaper price because I don't have the numbers over there. But at the same time, I'm also someone that I want to make sure I'm delivering content that is valuable. So it's not always about the money. Don't get me wrong, money is important, but sometimes I enjoy the community sense of it. Whereas, sure, I could put a video on TikTok and it can probably get to like 50K, but also at the same time, it's a lot of strangers that comment and they're not really engaging.
So I'm hearing it's going to be a useful thing for any kind of content creator, really, to curate an experience for yourself that you can still enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
um, I'm hearing something that you didn't say explicitly, which is, if you as a content creator go down the route of crowd service, wanting to do exactly what your community wants, it could turn into you no longer enjoying what you're doing. And
Yep.
then it's like, what are we doing then? And for therapists specifically, I would imagine most therapists, if not all of us, we did not get into this for the money. So
Mm-hmm.
if you out there thinking like you only want to do content creation for the money, that's probably not the right route either, is kind of what it sounds like I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like the way to also look at it is I think about when I had a moment where I I'm human and I was like the numbers, I needed to go viral. And in doing that, I burnt myself out because I
Mhm.
was constantly trying to post content, what does everyone say? Be consistent. But consistent, it depends on your level of consistency. So for me, consistent is showing up at least once a week. Whereas for some other creators, it might be posting 7 times a week. It just depends on what consistency looks like. But when I was trying to get the numbers,
Mhm.
I was not happy.
Mhm.
And when I stopped and said, you know what, I'm going to do what I want to create and let the numbers come to me instead of me chasing the numbers, I feel much happier. And sometimes I feel like for me, I don't know about other people, it's the most random video that I'm just like, hmm, okay, yeah, I'll film today. Nah, I don't really care if I post it. That people are like, this is amazing. I was like, what? I didn't even set my camera settings. I didn't put on no makeup. I didn't write out a script. That's what you like? And so the more I saw that, the more I realized, okay, I just need to show up and be me. Who cares about the numbers? Um, Obviously, I like to say too that when you have brand deals, they care about the numbers, obviously. But in a sense of creating the platform that I want, I was like, I have no control over the numbers at all. That is
Mhm.
completely out of my control. And so I've learned to be a happier person when it comes to my mood. I need to make sure that I'm not trying to control things that are out of my control. I can't control if people comment. I can't control if they watch. I can't control how long they watch. All I can do is be funny, be me, and hopefully they'll like it. If they don't, that's okay too.
It sounds like bring this back to an earlier thing. In order to create a safe space for yourself, you're still mindfully, curating content of your own that still feels good for you to create, since you've also had the experience of it not feeling so good when you're making stuff that you don't necessarily want to be doing.
Yeah.
Um, Another question, because you mentioned sometimes you might have a client that found you and then they talk about it. So this is really for other therapists out there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about just the navigation of being a content creator in such a public space while continuing to see clients? I imagine some people out there stop seeing clients, but probably some people are continuing to do both. So what does that look like? How do you navigate that with clients? Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say the first thing or advice that I would give someone is being cognizant of the type of content that you create. What do I mean by that? I've had ideas that maybe come up later and then, and this is an awareness piece. I ask myself, wait, where did that idea come from? Did that come from a session that you had with a client? That's very important, right? Because we speak to so many different people in a day. And so if you are creating content, you want to make sure that it doesn't relate back to a session that you had. Now, how do I navigate that? Because I've definitely had one like, oh, this is a really good idea. And I got this from a session. I change everything,
Mhm.
who it's about, who it's from, anything, and then I will change the topic. So let's say if I got an idea about anxiety from a session, I'm like, I need to like talk about that and tell a story about that. I will then talk about PTSD. If that kind of does that make sense? I'm hoping I'm making sense. So that's the first thing. The next thing is like in my paperwork at my private practice, it does say, hey, I have a social media account. You do not have to follow me. Even if I come up on your timeline, whatever it may be, if you see videos for me and brands, you do not have to follow me. And it's really reiterating for your safety too. Please don't comment, oh my gosh, that's my therapist.
Mhm.
Um, and then I've had clients that's like, I've posted some pretty, well, how would you say it? I've had clients that aren't aware that I was bisexual, for instance. They're like,
Mhm.
Shani, I saw your video. And I like to say, which one? And then sometimes I've had, the one where you talk about being bisexual. And I was like, okay. did you want to talk about that further? Or was there something that resonated with you? So sometimes your videos might even be helpful, because I've had clients that's like, I did not know that you were bisexual. And that's something that I have been trying to explore myself. And then I've never had a client that's like, I think you made a video and I didn't like it. And even if they did say that, I'd be like, that's cool. Why didn't you like it? What was it? Like, it's a great way for me to continue to build a relationship with my clients. And I actually do like it sometimes when they come across my videos, because the sessions aren't about us, the therapists. And so it gives them more information, because clients want to know who their therapists are sometimes. They want to be like, hey, what do you do on the weekends? What do you have kids? Do you have a partner? What's your favorite food? Sometimes clients want to ask those questions, but may feel fearful in doing so. And so my social media page is a great way for clients. I like to look at it as a great way for clients to get to know me a little bit better
Yeah. Yeah.
when they're not having a copay.
Right, right. So big tips is upholding confidentiality of our clients.
Yes.
Not creating content based on the lives of people coming to us with a great amount of trust there. I'm hearing that you include this information in your informed consent. So anybody that you're entering a therapeutic relationship with already gets the information presented to them, and then they can make an informed decision about whether they want to work with you based on this other stuff that you happen to do outside of session. And, you know, back to that theme of humanizing the therapist, your content allows your current clients to know something about you, which could be helpful for them. So I really like that. I'm sure you hear this all the time at this point, but I want to say congratulations to you for, curating this kind of position in this space. I think it's super impactful, very, very helpful, continues to normalize the conversation around mental health by making the image and idea of therapists much broader than it has been historically. Is there anything else that you would like to add, or other things that you'd like to share?
I would just say taking care of yourself, as if there's any therapists out there listening. We're living in times where yes, we were taking care of people, but I feel like ever since the pandemic, it like the ante just keeps getting upped. And it's important to make sure that you're doing your own work and taking care of yourself, and also being okay with like taking extended time off. That was something that I had to learn, because sometimes that couple of days or that week just isn't enough. It's like when you go on vacation and then on the fourth day you're settling in and you're like, "Oh, I leave tomorrow."
Mm-hmm.
Great. Rem- Being okay with taking time off for yourself, because one of the things that we want to also model for our clients is when we do things, it models for them. And when you do that, that sends the message to the clients like, oh, okay. So my therapist doesn't just talk, like they actually do what they may encourage or inspire. And I think that's really important. And we forget that as therapists sometimes, that the best teaching moments are actually through modeling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100%. I mean, like, if you look at kids, they're very good at saying to their parents, like, why do I have to do that? You don't do that. It's like
Yeah.
kind of similar thing there. So thank you for sharing that insight there. So thank you so much for your time, for your expertise here, all the wonderful tips that you've provided. If people want to learn more about you, where can they go to find you on all these different platforms?
Yeah, I would say if you want to really connect with me, the best way to do that is Instagram, the Shani Project. And then if you are looking for like a resource, I do have a book out that's called Dope Therapy that you can find wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other places. I feel like those are the two that comes to mind. And yeah, I'll see you on the internet somewhere.
Great. Thank you so much. And hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.